It is only with the most intense concentration that I can dismiss the trembling of my hands long enough to pen this missive. I am neither a drunkard nor a fiend of opiates. I am prone to occasional infusion of spirits, but not to the detriment of my mental faculties, which is why I know that I know what I have just seen was no flight of fancy or induced delusion. Now, I have not recorded the events of that night, only 3 months ago, in either text or speech, for despite what might be built of my ego in braggadocious recitation, what happened that night is naught but shameful. But now that shame has evolved into the most creeping of horrors. It must be understood that I am not alike of my brothers. The Mulvaney line, to which I am but an appendix, was a strong and respected breed in Kingsport, and so it remains, in memory at least. My 2 older brothers shared the largesse of the Mulvaney fortunes, strong of back, broad-shouldered, fiery-haired, and with the pale, serene blue eyes that were the hallmark of my father's bloodline. Indeed, my older brothers were specimens of perfection, and were regarded as such by all. Men respected them, and women, well, there were always women. I, however, was not to share their fate, for I was born thin and sickly, with musty brown hair and drawn features. No Greek hero, more a lowly scribe. But yet I, too, was marked as a Mulvaney, with those same pale, serene, blue eyes. And so it was that my brothers eagerly enlisted into what would become the war to end all wars, the pair of them ultimately leaving their lives and their legends on some far-flung battlefield. Suffice it to say, I did not join them, for I was deemed too frail and infirm, as is my lot. Oh, were I to have died bravely in glorious battle, rather than to live on as a pathetic reflection of the lost gallantry of my better brethren. But all of that is pretext, an explanation aforehand of why the events of only 3 months ago were so alien to my experience at first, and ever more so as that night proceeded. It is again very important that you understand that I was of sound mind when all of this began. The truth of my sanity now, given what I have just seen, is a question I will leave to others. As I said, I am not given to constant drink, but that night, only 3 months ago, saw me wandering after a day's work at the accountant's office into a local bar that I would very rarely frequent. It can only be the maliciousness of misfortune that spontaneity chose that night, of all nights, to have me treat myself before the long walk home. The polyglot clientele of the place ran the gamut from the lowly functionary, as I am, on upwards to those of high collars, seeking a novelty of drinking among the dredges. I perched myself on an open stool at the end of the bar, hoping that this would be a rare occasion in which I was not recognized and silently compared to my fallen brothers. The bartender, a stout and red-faced man, provided me a requested ale without so much as a glance or comment, for which I was grateful. I closed my eyes as I lifted the mug, feeling the soothing cool coat my inner unease. After a healthy draw, I set the glass down, opened my eyes, and first gazed upon my new and unexpected neighbors. Though the seats beside me had been empty but a moment before, they suddenly held occupants of a most disarming and alluring nature. 2 women, of whom I did not recall ever seeing in my life amongst the Kingsport denizens, looked upon me with eyes most unfamiliar in their lustful intent. One sunny-haired, the other crowned in chocolate brown. Their forms and form of dress teetered on the edge of decency in polite society, but were, perhaps, common attire for a place such as that bar. To my amazement, they took to engaging me in conversation, immediately engendering in me cautious suspicion. For, too many times than I care to recount, I have been the subject of cruel teasings from the fairer sex, for the insipid entertainment of themselves, or for others watching from afar. But as the minutes passed, their attentions felt more and more genuine. However much of these self-assurances were fueled by drink is a game of subjectivity at best. But for the bulk of the night, the three of us were ensconced together in a dim corner booth, and I spied more than one jealous glance from men more accustomed to being the center of attention. I was, in a word, elated. Corralled by beautiful women, their giggles and light touches and pleadings for me to regale them with tales of my otherwise mundane existence was more intoxicating than any spirited brew could ever be, though both filled my senses until, as memory tells me, I found myself flanked between the two as we stumbled towards an apartment they shared on Grayson Lane. I recall only the flurry of movement, sensual heat, and laughter as a most unfamiliar frolicking commenced, the sensation of sheets and silken skin upon my own, the warm and liquid lavishing of excess and debauchery that had been merely the stuff of fantasy for my entire life. There was a period, then, where I remember nothing, merely a darkness, and it was after this that the nightmares begin. Until just a short time ago, I had convinced myself it had just been an alcohol and hormone-induced dream. The two women, completely naked, standing at either corner at the foot of the bed, their hands held aloft in supplication to some unseen force, chanting in a strange and alien tongue that I could not imagine a human throat conjuring. Upon their skin were symbols etched in red. Whether it were paint or blood, I cannot be certain. And I, helpless, bound to the bed with rope, with similar symbols adorning my lower regions. And the symbols, both on they and on myself, seemed to move of their own accord. She of the chocolate hair, upon completing whatever was their incantation, mounted me fully, as the sunny-haired one stared down into my eyes, continuing to vocalize alien and eldritch sounds that seemed to permeate my very soul. There was an explosion then, both physical and metaphysical, for I was not of my body. There was only a vision. A vast expanse of vermilion raindrops falling before mountains of ecstasy and unfathomable despair, stalwart peaks beneath a starless black sky. And there, just above the horizon, quivered a roiling mask of cycloptean appendages, slick and shimmering in the darkness. The mass formed and reformed above me, until finally settling on a shape, that of the two women, combined as one, the duality of terror gaping its fathomless maw before me, screaming into my face as it all reached its climax. And then nothing. I awoke early the next morning, dawn's light crashing painfully into my eyes. Haggard and unkempt, clothed but disoriented in the alley behind the bar. So shaken was I that not even the disturbed stares of passerby fazed me as I sauntered painstakingly homeward, clasping my arms around me as though to physically stabilize my senses. From that day and forward until just a scant few minutes ago, I returned to the doldrums of my daily routine. Work, home, sleep, work again. I attempted to shunt away the events of that night as merely a debauched fantasy, a fever dream of alcohol and long-suppressed passions. That was until today. I had been proceeding home as was normal, not daring to cast my gaze too widely, as was normal, lest someone recognize me and the failure of my lineage. But as I reached a street corner, movement on the other side of the road caught my attention, and ice water trickled down my spine as I stared agape. There were the two women, she of sunny hair, the other of chocolate crown. They proceeded, smiling, as I remembered them, but these smiles were now joyful rather than predatory, and unlike before, they had with them a companion. For swinging between their happy gait, acting as a link between their gently clasping hands, was a child, a boy who appeared at least 3 years of age, perhaps 4, with gilded brown curls upon his head. I stood stock still, staring at the trio. The women did not seem to notice me as they advanced towards the street corner, oblivious to the world outside of their radiant bliss. But as they paused at the corner, the boy turned towards me. He looked upon me with a spark of intelligence that was unnatural for a child, seemingly assessing my totality with a dispassion far beyond his years. But it was not this preternatural stare that delivered unto me the horror I feel now, and it was not the reappearance of his companions, from whom I departed only 3 months ago. Only 3 months ago. For the intelligence that met my gaze was contained within the pale, serene blue eyes that were my own. The end of Two Girls, One Seed by Scribelight. Read for you by the author.